Okay, so once you bring in your video clips, if you just double click on them, you can kind of preview which one you're looking at. So I think it was the first one, which was the 3D camera track. And actually, the first part of the clip is really shaky and whatever. So scroll into about 2 seconds, and then this little button right here will set the in point. So we're just like looking in the clips, like I'll call it like personal properties or whatever. And you can set an endpoint earlier or not. But now that we have that in and out set, if you click and drag that clip onto this symbol right here, you see that it will create a composition that's based on this frame rate and based on the clip's time that we set the in and out point of. So your composition should be perfect and ready to go. And then go up to effects and presets, and if you just look up 3D camera, it will give you this option to 3D camera track. You can just click and drag that onto your clip, but there's also the way to do the exact same thing is opening up this tracker window, and if that clip is selected, you can also say track camera, I believe. So that will automatically add that effect as well. The only reason why you might want to do this version rather than the other is because this offers you the option to like track points as well. Okay, so when you drop it on, it should automatically start initializing, and as you can see, it goes frame by frame, and it sometimes takes a while. So if you have like a 20-second clip, I think this is like a 10-second clip, and it's going to take about 2 minutes to track. A 20-second clip, you know, it could be 4 minutes or whatever. And sometimes if it doesn't initialize, you might want to change the start and end point. Yeah, so we'll just wait for a second. Record. So while you guys are tracking, we can tell at least it kind of worked because I can see these little crosses, I guess. And then if I like move my mouse over it, you'll see these targets, I guess you could say. And really it didn't quite work that well, because between these crosses and this one, like look at this, the area it's covering. It's saying like it recognizes that this is a plane in space, and look at how much like empty area there is. And then down here it's recognizing that that's a plane in space, but the target doesn't really look like it's sitting on the ground, at least not perfectly. So you kind of want to look around for some nice spaces. If you can't see that those crosses, it could just be you clicked off your effect. If you like go working on something else and you click somewhere else, you're like, oh no, where did those crosses go? You just have to navigate back into the clip, go to the effects and click your 3D camera tracker, and they pop up. You can also see that there's an average error of 1.03. So I think that means this is like a mediocre track. If you get a really low number, it's a low error value, which is like great. And I think there's something you can like track point size. You can make them bigger so they're easier for you to see, but I just usually leave things at the default. So how do we find a target, or if you can't find a target that you like, you can also just like click and drag and highlight some points to like make a target. So that actually was pretty decent. Or maybe I'll click and drag and see if I can make a target on those ground, but it just doesn't look great. So I'm gonna just see what happens if I select mine up here. And with that target selected, if you right click, so if you don't have a double mouse, which we just got some in, on the Mac, if you control and just click, if you hold control and click, this menu will come up that says, okay, create text in camera, create solid in camera, or create null in camera. And we'll just start with the create text in camera. And right there, a camera appeared in our composition, and a text object appeared. So if I double click on that text, I can change it to, guess what, something. So how do we move this something in space if we don't want it to be stuck on the wall? Before we get to that, if you toggle your switch in mode with this button down here, or if you hit F4, you get to these switches, and we can see that, you know, here's where you normally turn on motion blur or turn it off, but there's also this little 3D cube, which means that this is a 3D layer. And if you click that, you can see these this little cross of points, and you can hover your mouse on the different axes, and it'll say, okay, I have the Z axis. If I want to bring that off the wall, if I want to push it back in space, I could click the X axis and drag. You can also hit P or open up your transform tools, and you get the position with X, Y, and Z. So if I want to move it on the X, or that's the Y. Interesting. Anyways, I would have assumed that was Z, but so let's just see how it looks. I mean, that's it. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Like, it doesn't seem that amazing, but really that's amazing. We did no work. Let me turn off my sound. Yeah, and it's a little off. It feels like it's floating a little bit, and that's, I would say, just one of the limitations. Like, it's rare to have a perfect camera track, especially if you're just doing handheld with a cell phone. You can also bring up the rotation properties and maybe like rotate it on the Z to like line it up more. If you want it to pop out, so it's like actually floating, we can bring it out like this. But I would say one thing, also if you're clicking on an axis and trying to move it, if you want to move it quicker, hold shift and it moves a lot quicker. So let's just throw it out there. One thing to make it look a little more realistic is to turn on motion blur. So you turn it on in your composition and then turn it on that text layer, and then you might get something. We'll just see. Yeah. So I think the reason why it looks like it's slipping is it looks like it. We just need to shrink it and move it. Okay, that's good enough. So let's see what happens if we just use this nodal pan or this tripod type track. So I'm gonna make a new composition. I just set that clip. I'm gonna drag it onto here, and I'm gonna add the 3D camera tracker to it. And luckily it's a shorter clip, so it should analyze a little quicker. Okay, so right off the bat we see these points, and then the target is always like facing the camera, and it says no depth from a tripod pan solve, or no depth from a tripod. So just like I said, it doesn't know where it is, but you can still theoretically attempt to, and it actually might just look like it's floating, but let's see. So that actually doesn't look that bad. Turn on motion blur.
You could like keyframe its rotation, yes, right? Like it's on the wrong time.
Yeah, maybe.
That's pretty spot on to me.
Looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, for basically no thought. What you might also be able to do to fake it a little bit is pull it out, maybe duplicate it. And then this bottom one, maybe we could like bring back, move down, and add a blur. I think the one we're going to use is actually called a box blur. It's the quickest for the program. Fast box blur. Just blur it and change the color of your Character, oops, to black, and change the transparency. So now, like, it looks like it's floating, kind of, but that's kind of cool.
Shiny-ish.
Yeah. So that's just another form of tripod or camera tracking. And I think a lot of people, they want to like jump into like, well, this looks the coolest, but as you saw, you know, you encounter quite a few problems really quickly. And this right here is like decent CG work, and it actually looks better than I mean, if I were to pick one or the other to turn into a client, like I would not turn this into a client. But this one, you know, it has some more quality. So if I had to choose one, it would be this one. So I think a lot of people jump into like, well, I'm just going to 3D camera track it. But when you're just doing this tripod tracking, you don't have to worry so much about the lens you're using, because it's just like doing a much easier calculation. It's just looking for a few points and seeing like, oh, those points shift. So yeah, if this one will work as well, but I'm going to just drag this and make a new composition. And instead of adding the 3D camera tracker, I'm going to say track motion. And right off a little tracking point pops up. And as you know, we zoom in, we can see like it's not the highest resolution, but there's two boxes. The first box is what is the image that it's going to try to look for. When the camera moves, it's going to look for that thing that looks basically like a circle and a cross in it. And then the second box is how far is it going to search. So if I have this huge second box, it's going to be searching like a really large area in the next frame to find that. So it'll take longer to calculate. So if I since the camera didn't move that fast, I can keep this box relatively small. Also, right now, it's only going to track this one point, and it won't be able to calculate if the camera rotates in any way. So I can turn on position and rotation, which gives me another tracking point to maybe put over here. And then you just want to make sure it doesn't matter really if you're at the beginning of your clip, but it helps. I'm at the beginning. There's this play button now, and it will analyze forward. So it's keeping those points on it's just tracking those points. Yay. So that worked totally fine. Here is the best way to use this information. We're going to click back to our composition here, and I don't see those points anymore. I'm going to right click and say create a new null object. And this is going to be kind of like a controller. This is going to jump to those tracking points. And you don't see it when you render, but it's there, and it can help guide things. So let's go back to that clip, which was, I'll just double click on it. And it brings up all our tracking information. And I'm going to just say edit target and choose that null, hit OK, and hit apply. And I'm going to apply the X and Y, so it'll calculate position and rotation. So now, if we look at this null, it like sticks, it moves with that original point, and I believe it rotates a little. So let's make a new something. So this one isn't so much 3D, but anyways, I want this text to stick to that null object, or in another word, I want to parent it to that null object. Or another way to put it, I want this to be the child of this parent. Two ways to do that. So if you're in the right switches and modes, actually it doesn't look like it matters. You can actually like do this drop-down menu and say I want the parent to be the null. Or you can use this pick whip. If you have a huge amount of layers, you can like drag this pick whip and like move to any layer. So if I choose null, Now wherever the null goes, the something follows. So that's another way. This would be something like, you know, if somebody's holding a cell phone, you could track the cell phone, and if the cell phone, you know, if a text screen pops up and the cell phone moves, that text screen will like follow it. So you could use that for, like, I'm imagining like if a hologram screen, like, you know, pops up, you know, and the phone moves, that will move with it. So those are the 3